Hello, and welcome to another episode of CloseMode, the enterprise sales show. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, the CEO of Close Strong. And on this show, I get to interview cool people who are smart people about fun subjects. And today, I'm lucky enough to be with Brad Rosen, who is the president at Sales Assembly and also one of my Chicago homies. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here. Glad to be with you, and glad that we can share Chicago in common. Although right now it's a little chilly.
Yeah, it's Freeze Mageddon. There's Snow Mageddon, and now it's Freeze Mageddon. So thanks for living through it. So today we're going to be talking about kind of broadly the uniqueness of enterprise sellers. What's your position on mistakes people make when they're sourcing enterprise sellers?
I'd say the biggest one is going after the flashy resume. Trying to find the enterprise seller from Salesforce or from IBM or any one of these large companies, and without thinking about like, what do you really need? Are you at the place where you can take on that person who has that experience, which is obviously wonderful to have, but what stage are you at? Are you just building your enterprise team, and do you need that type of person on your team? Are they going to thrive in that environment, right? And start to think about that. Or do you have a 20, 30, 40 person team? Maybe that's the right time to bring on someone with that experience. And so a lot of times the mistakes are not sitting down and thinking about what are the skills I really need this person to have. If they're an early seller, you want them to be, autonomous. You want them to have ability to be a self-starter and to come up with their own ideas and be able to adapt and change and be able to help you build out the process. Versus obviously if they're much later, and it's already established, then you want them to be able to follow a defined process and be detail oriented and be able to really execute your vision. So very different things. A lot of times we go after that flashy person. Sometimes we have to like overpay for them because they're used to higher salaries at larger companies and things. And many times it doesn't work out.
It's interesting too. We talked about finding your enterprise salespeople in the SMB or your mid-market sales teams, and we know enterprise deals are longer, they're more complex, more custom solutions, a lot more risk. What would you say are the skills that an enterprise seller needs, and why, as you mentioned in our previous conversation about, it doesn't really work to move people up sometimes from SMB or mid-market? What are the different skills that enterprise sellers need?
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of the issue is we just see this like linear path. It's like I'm going to start as a BDR, I'm going to go to SMB sales, then to mid-market sales, then to enterprise sales, then to management. Like it's this defined path, which just really isn't the case. Sometimes that works, just not all the time. And they're very different paths. And when we think about the enterprise, our best seller, enterprise seller at G2 worked at our biggest client. And he would sit there and he would understand who all the people were and created personal relationships and continued to build out and navigate the organization. And that's the biggest thing I think that is needed. Now, not to say that those things aren't needed in the SMB and the mid-market, right? Building relationships and multi-threading, all that, very helpful. It's just not always necessary. In the enterprise, it's necessary. And you have to be able to do that in conjunction with still being able to sell the value and be able to share why some larger enterprise should take a shot on you. Again, if you're Salesforce, that's not a conversation. If you're an up-and-comer, you have to have that conversation in a meaningful way and be able to present yourself in a wonderful way. So that's important. Navigating the complex sales cycle is another thing that's really challenging. And that's the biggest difference between SMB and mid-market. You're including procurement, legal, budgeting is very different. You're asking for a much higher price point, which means like there's a lot more decision making that goes into it. So those discussions are few and far between, I would say, definitely in the SMB and probably a lot of times in the mid-market. And so somebody that can navigate all that, there's a project management element to that, to understanding like, who am I talking to and when? Who do I need to bring together? How do I inform this conversation? A lot of times enterprise sellers are actually teaching people about their own organization. They're saying, hey, I talked to Sally over here and she mentioned that they're working on this. And they're like, wow, I didn't even know Sally was working on that. Great to know. You're bringing people together. That's where you're adding value. Again, not to say that those things aren't important in the SMB and the mid-market. It's just that in the enterprise, they're amplified. And that's a really big skill set that you need to have.
It's interesting. One of my consultants was saying to me a couple of weeks ago that, a really important skill for an enterprise seller, and I'm wondering how you feel about this, is that oftentimes you made me think of it talking about sort of educating the customer, that customer has got to take your story forward for them. So a key skill for an enterprise seller is enabling your customers to then go tell that story for you and sort of sell internally. How do you feel about that?
I think that that is a challenge. And I would say actually that is starting to become the reality across the spectrum, SMB and mid-market as well, because there just are becoming more stakeholders and more scrutiny, especially right now with, say, the CFO or other budgetary concerns. But in the enterprise, most definitely. And the hard part about that is arming your champion with enough information that they pitch it the correct way and that they have the conviction. Because most of the time that you pitch a new product or thought or service, the first answer is like, well, why? Like, why should we change, right? Like, status quo is generally the easiest thing to stick by. So if they're pitching it to a colleague, a coworker, maybe their boss, their first reaction is to be like skeptical. And so how do you create enough, not only information so they have the information, but passion that they want to fight back and they want to say, no, trust me, like this is worth it. And that's a skill, and that's hard to do because it not only involves your skill set, but you need to have the materials and the resources to do that. So we're talking about marketing. We're talking about customer references. We're talking about being able to have the right talk track. A lot of that's enabling your team the right way. And as we talked about earlier, if you have a team that is not as well defined or still being built and in growth mode, you probably don't have those resources as much as other teams do. So what that creates is this kind of gap. So either you're not doing all the things you need to be doing to get that enterprise sale, or you're creating them yourself. You're creating a reference call. You're creating a case study. You're making a new deck because you think it'll be useful in your next conversation with, the higher ups. And so you have to either be resourceful or have the resources internally, and you should know which one of those is being required of your sellers.
I wonder, back to something you mentioned about sort of sourcing enterprise sellers, from upstream from SMB and mid market. So, I mean, that's one place we can get them. We said that isn't ideal because they might not have the chops. We know we can look for people with enterprise sales chops on their resume. Is there any other interesting places to go, given the sort of specific skill set that an enterprise seller needs? Is there any creative options to go look for new enterprise sellers?
Yeah. I mean, I will say, like, I'll caveat my previous statement with the best place to find sellers is always on your own team, right? I just want to point out that not every good mid-market or SMB seller is going to be a good enterprise seller. I've always found that the best place to look for SMB or mid-market reps is in your BDR team. And the best place, you can work your team up because you've seen them over the years. You know what they can do, but it is saying like there's a specific skill set they would need to have. Having said that, outside of that, you can look to other places. It's just really challenging because there's a long time period here where it's hard to determine whether someone's doing a good job. Let's say you have a 6-month sales cycle, 12, 18, like it could be a long sales cycle. So by the time they get in seat, they're enabled, they're ramped, they're starting to have conversations with customers and then actually have an expectation of sale. You could be a year or two in and you've wasted a lot of time and money on somebody who's actually not that good. So you really need to know that this person, have confidence that this person is going to do well. Obviously, past performance is like part of that. References is generally your best bet of having somebody that has worked with a person in the past. I also think when you talk about creativity, there's a common skill set among enterprise reps and really great CSMs that I think is overlooked a lot of times. You can teach a lot of things, but the relationship aspect and the ability to show value. If you have a great CSM, for instance, who has worked on larger accounts for a long time, they know how to navigate the org. They know how to show value. They know how to talk about procurement and legal and these other aspects of the sale that are just very different than things. And I could definitely see where looking to really strong CSMs and teaching them part of the sales process would be beneficial, especially if they already have that relationship management experience and that piece and that kind of that motion.
I've talked to a couple enterprise sales reps lately who have talked about, hey, I'm really good at what I'm doing, and now they're trying to suck me into management, and I got to take a pay cut. And you and I touched on that a week ago. What are your thoughts on that sort of career pathing? Maybe keeping people in enterprise sales and making it okay for them to stay.
I would say that with all sellers, I mean, do you want to go into management if you like having tough conversations and losing sleep at night and making less than your top reps, then yeah, management is great for you. It's wonderful, and I personally love management. Like, there's certain aspects of it, obviously, that I'm kidding, but having said that, it's not for everybody, and I think that there shouldn't be this understanding that like the only way to move up is through management. A lot of people are really good at what they do when they're selling. You can make a lot of money doing it. You don't have to worry about others. You focus on you, yourself, and your book. You have usually a lot of autonomy if you're a good seller. You can kind of do what you need to do and make sure you get obviously the job done and you hit your numbers, but you have autonomy to getting there. And especially in the enterprise, I think there's an understanding of having high level conversations and building relationships, and you build a book of business, which is wonderful. And that's a pretty good gig if you can get it and you have a built-in book of business that you're doing well and you're growing year after year. And so I think that stigma of the fact that you're not a manager is ridiculous. And I also think that, when you look at it, the managers are the first people, usually on the chopping block if things aren't going well. And the top reps are not. Those are always the last people that would ever go, right? Somebody's got to bring in the money. And so I do think, again, the same way that we had to look at the skill set from, like, say, an SMB rep all the way up to an enterprise, you got to look at the skill set of an enterprise rep to management. And management is about managing people and being able to get the most out of your team and being able to motivate. Hiring is a big part of management. Firing, unfortunately, is a part of management, performance management. Being able to do both those things is very challenging, both emotionally and actually doing it, the right way. And that's not the same skill set as, I know how to go in and show value to clients and multi-thread and be able to network within an organization and be able to close big business. Like, those are completely separate skills. And I think it's up to the individual and obviously the organization to determine, like, which skill set do you have and which do you want to build out, right? You can learn certain skills and then go from there. But I do think that whole, you need to be in management and to grow your career, I think that's bogus.
We all know that the best sales reps and the best enterprise sales reps don't always make the best managers. And I was fortunate at one point in my career to work for Bill Marriott Hotels. And Mr. Marriott used to say that the very same things that lead to your success are the very same things that will lead to your failure in your next role. And for me, when you think about what makes you a great enterprise seller, what makes you a great, you're a rock star. And now you're making that shift into building other rock stars, right? And then I think that's a massive shift for a lot of people.
Huge. I read something the other day that said, Albert Einstein was wonderful at a few things, but if he was on your basketball team, you wouldn't be very good, And it's the same principle. It's like, just because I have a phenomenal enterprise rep doesn't mean they should be a manager. And just because Albert Einstein is a genius doesn't mean he should be on my basketball team. And so it's finding that skill set, honing in on that skill set, and then continuing to learn and train yourself to get better at the skill set that you want to be the best at.
Do you think there is that enterprise sales is different enough that we should think about the sort of care and feeding of them as really differentiated from traditional sales? And I'm talking about, comp packages, goal setting, skill development. Is it really almost an entirely different motion?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give the old adage of it depends. I think it depends on the product. It depends on the company. It depends on a lot of different things. But having said all that, I do think it's challenging. You look at forecasting. You have to forecast completely differently. You're not having, weekly pipeline calls for enterprise sales deals that take 12 to 18 months to come through. Yeah, you want to see how progress is going. It's just not as impactful as, say, SMB deals that are 30 to 60 days to close, right? You want weekly updates. You want to see progress quickly. You need to make sure that the deals are moving forward, in or out, right? They're moving up or down, as we say, right? So that we're not wasting our time and energy. And so the forecasting process is different. Our quotas need to be different. A lot of times they're very lumpy, right? We have to understand that deals only come in. We're going whale hunting. Okay, there's only going to be a handful of deals a year. Is that H1? Is that H2? So how do accelerators work? I mean, comp gets very complicated there. And as we talked about earlier, the ramp and understanding if someone's doing a good job, it can take years to build a book of business, especially if you're trying to go in cold to new accounts. So, how do we measure success is very challenging, and you need to have more patience. But at the same time, enterprise reps are commanding a higher salary because in theory they should be bringing in more money. So, higher salary, but need to wait longer to understand whether they're being successful is generally not very profitable for a business. And so that's why when we mentioned finding the right fit for your organization, whether that's through personality tests, references, having an understanding of who that person is that you're bringing in is really important, because making the wrong hire, especially in enterprise, is really challenging. So I do think you need to be cognizant of this is a different sale. It happens on a different time frame, and we need to compensate them potentially differently is important to align the reps and the organization. And those two things are very different than a transactional sale, in my opinion.
The other thing that occurs to me is sort of the mental part of like the quick hits with the short close rates. Like, yeah, I think there's a certain type of seller like that, and I know for me and for most of us who have sold like that, that's the needle in the arm, like closing deals. And it, as you're talking through this, it makes that mindset of an enterprise. So you're not getting. I mean, you have to take other wins along the way, right? With an 18-month sales cycle.
There are ways to supplement that. We used to say, let's get some ham sandwiches while we're waiting for our steak, right? So we would give smaller deals or smaller enterprise deals or find ways to get, like you said, that shot in the arm, because sales is about confidence, and it's about having not only you had the confidence part, you had obviously people want to get paid. Like they don't just want 0, 0, 0, 0, big lump, 0, 0, 0, 0. Like that's not how anyone wants to be paid as well. So, and the business wants to see cash coming in. So there are ways to supplement books and try and get people, other wins along the way. But that is something to consider as to how do we make sure the reps are motivated? They know they're doing well. They know they're tracking. They're still making money, and the company is seeing value from their investment.
We started talking about, hey, people see these as the same. Where do you think that problem most exists? Is it sort of senior leadership that just lumps sales all together? Where does that exist, and how do we correct that?
I think it's the old fallacy of like, if it works in one place, it'll work in the other, right? Hey, we're doing this in the mid-market, so why wouldn't the same thing work in the enterprise? Why wouldn't we have the same outbound motion? Why wouldn't we be able to just hire some reps and they'll ramp quickly? Like it's that old fallacy, and that's part of, frankly, the way that we've built the model, the VC model of get funding, spend it, pour gas on the fire, right? Like the what everyone says. But that's because we say, well, if you can do it here, let's just replicate it up market. That's not always the case. And as we know, there could be other challengers. There could be other things you're not thinking about, security or other things that enterprise cares about significantly more than the down market folks do. And so it takes time to adapt and to get up there. And so I do believe that we need to really think about how we're setting these folks up for success and how we're differentiating them from the rest of the team to ensure that they're able to see success and that the business is able to determine their success. Because a lot of times as we're building out the team, it doesn't just have to be a new enterprise team. It could say we're trying to scale the team from 10 to 20. Same principle. Does that work? Will we see the same conversion rates? Do we have enough in our ICP or our target markets to be able to actually sustain this? And a lot of times we just assume that we can double the team or add 5 more heads and be able to see the same success rate. And that's not always the case. So I think that that's the big key, is understanding how do we test things slowly, or at least make sure that we have a good hypothesis as to why we can make this successful within our business.
Something that comes to mind as we're talking is I was part of introducing national account management into a company when the notion of like national accounts is different than regular selling. And so we kind of had to go through a lot of this. And it occurs, I wonder what your thoughts are on either the correlations or the differences between enterprise sellers and national or global account managers.
I think that there's frankly a high correlation between them. And it's really depending on what skill set you want them to have and what the role actually is. I think a lot of national account managers do upsell and cross-sell. Others are more just on the relationship side. And same thing in enterprise sales. Do you have a CSM? Do you not have a CSM, right, working in conjunction with you? Are you responsible for upsell? Are you responsible only for, keeping the current account? And then there's that whole idea of hunter versus farmer. And there's a lot of organizations that really struggle with that. Is for the enterprise, are you splitting it out so that there's certain folks who are hunting into the enterprise, which again, very different motion than farming in the enterprise. So, are we asking the same person to do both things, which is hard from the sense of like different motions and code switching? And it's also hard from the idea of you really want to focus, a rep is going to focus where they can make the most money. And so if the easiest, lowest hanging fruit is to focus on those current accounts, then they're probably going to focus there and not go hunt as much, or vice versa. And that's hard for the business. And so like a lot of times you want to say, let's specialize. We'll have hunters and farmers, but a national accounts person, maybe doing both. And so I think it's really that idea of what we're really talking about is there are large organizations that are multifaceted, that have a lot of politics involved, and you need to be able to navigate that organization. And then in the end, if your job is just to keep them happy, great, that's one option. If your job is to renew, cross-sell, upsell, that's a whole nother skill set that you need to take care of. But when you look at the core foundation of what we're looking for in somebody that's going to be successful, I can build relationships. I can understand, as you mentioned at the top, I can arm my champions with the information they need to go disseminate this information internally. And I can continue to grow my business case to make sure they're seeing value out of what we're offering.
This has been a cool and interesting discussion for me, and I feel like it's not talked about enough. I'm just looking back at a quick recap. We talked about like how do you find them? What are the key skills, right? And how are those different? Let's not put them all in the same bucket. And then how do we care and feed? And also the piece about career pathing, I think is interesting too. I haven't seen enough out there about that, about how do we keep the people in there that need to be there. So this has been really cool, and I hope others find it helpful, and I really appreciate your time. This has been fun.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for having me, and appreciate your time as well.
Stay warm.